It's very rare in great literature. What you have in great literature generally is the internal drama, right? As the literature becomes more pop, I would say, the characters are more unitary. So there's a real bad guy and he's all bad, and there's a real good guy and he's all good. And that's not as interesting. It's not as sophisticated. When you reach Dostoyevsky heights in literary representation, or Shakespearean heights, you can identify with the villain. And that's when literature really reaches its pinnacle in some sense.
And also the characters change throughout. They shift throughout. They're unpredictable throughout. I'm taking the speaking of Russian more seriously recently. And I've gotten to talk to translators of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov and those kinds of folks. And you get one of the mistakes that translators made with Dostoevsky for the longest time is they would, quote unquote, fix the chaotic mess that is Dostoevsky, because there was a sense like he was too rushed in his writing. It seemed like there was tangents that had nothing to do with anything. The characters were unpredictable, not inconsistent. There's parts of phrases that seem to be incomplete, that kind of stuff. And what they realized that's actually crafted that way. It's like editing James Joyce, like Finnegan's Wake or something, because it doesn't make any sense. They realize that is the magic of it. That captures the humanity of these characters, that they are unpredictable. They change throughout time. There's a bunch of contradictions. On which point I gotta ask, is there a case to be made that Brothers Karamazov is the greatest book ever written?
Yeah, there is a case to be made for that. I don't know. Is it better than Crime and Punishment?
Yes, yeah.
You think so? Why do you? I'm not arguing with you. Why do you think that?
Well, every book is a person. Some of my best friends are inside that book.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. There's no doubt about it.
I think it's some books are defined by your personal relationship with them, and that one was definitive. And I almost graduated to that one because for the longest time, The Idiot was my favorite book of all, because I identified with the ideas represented by Prince Myshkin. I also identified
that's interesting.
to Prince Myshkin as a human being.
The holy fool.
The fool, yeah, because the world kind of, my whole life still kind of saw me in my perception, in my narrow perception, as kind of the fool. And different from the interpretation that a lot of people take of this book, I see him as a kind of hero, to be
definitely.
To be a naive, quote unquote, fool, but really just a naive optimist, and naive in the best possible way. I do believe that's
childlike.
Yeah, childlike is a better. So naive is usually seen as
that's childish, naive.
Yeah, but childlike.
That's why no one enters the kingdom of heaven unless they become like a child. That's Prince Myshkin. Dostoevsky knew that. So that's why you like The Idiot. That's so interesting. See, I think I like Crime and Punishment because you identified with Myshkin. I think I identified more with Raskolnikov because I was tempted by a Luciferian intellect, in the manner that, in a manner very similar to the manner he was tempted. But I mean, I think you can make a case that The Brothers Karamazov is Dostoevsky's crowning achievement.
Well,
and that's something, man. He ruined literature for me. Because everything else just felt insipid afterwards. Yeah. Not everything. I found some books that, in my experience, hit that pinnacle. The Master and Margarita. That's a deadly book. I read that, I think, 4 times, and it's unbelievably deep. There's a Nikos Kazantzakis, a Greek writer. Some of his writing is amazing as well.
Did you ever connect with the literary, like existentialist Camus, or people like Hermann Hesse, or even Kafka? Yeah. Did you ever connect with those?
To the same degree?
Yeah, to the same.
Enough to be an influence. You have to be deaf in some fundamental sense not to encounter a great dead friend and fail to learn. And I mean, I tried to separate the wheat from the chaff when I read, and I read all the great clinicians, all of them, perhaps not. Those who are foremost in the pantheon And I tried to pull out what I could, and that was a lot. I learned a lot from Freud. I learned a lot from Rogers. And I learned a lot from Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. I'm going to do a course on Dostoevsky and Nietzsche for this Peterson Academy. This is coming up in January.
Oh, that'll be them
I'm
together.
really looking forward to it.
You're weaving.
I hadn't thought about doing them together.
Oh.
That'd be fun. That's a good idea.
Well,
that'd be a good idea.
There's an interesting.
Steal that idea.
You often weave them together
Yeah.
really masterfully, because there is religious, in the broad sense of that word, themes throughout the writing of both.
Yeah, well, there's uncanny parallelisms in their writing and their lives. So, and Dostoevsky's deeper than Nietzsche, but that's because he was a writer of fiction.
Well, Nietzsche is almost a character in a Dostoevsky.
He is definitely that. He is definitely that, yes. And apparently Nietzsche knew more about Dostoevsky than people had thought. There's been some recent scholarship on that grounds. Dostoevsky didn't know anything about Nietzsche, as far as I know. I could be wrong about that. But the thing that Dostoevsky had over Nietzsche is Nietzsche had to make things propositional in some real sense, because he was a philosopher. And it's hard to propositionalize things that are outside your ken, but you can characterize them. And so in The Brothers Karamazov, Ivan is a more developed character than Alyosha in the explicit sense. He can make better arguments, but Alyosha wins like Mishkin because he's the better man, and Dostoevsky can show that in the actions. Rather, he can't render it entirely propositional, but that's probably because what's good can't be rendered entirely propositional. And so Dostoevsky had that edge over Nietzsche. He said, well, Ivan is this brilliant rationalist, atheist, materialist, and puts forward an argument on that front that's still unparalleled as far as I'm concerned, and overwhelms Alyosha, who cannot respond, but Alyosha is still the better man. So, which is very interesting, that.
The funny thing about those two characters is you, Jordan Peterson, seem to be somebody that at least in part embodies both, because you are one of the intellectuals of our time, rigorous in thought, but also are able to have that kind of, what would you describe? If you remove the religiosity of Alyosha, there's what's a good word? Love towards the world.
Spirit of encouragement.
Yes. Which one?
Yeah, well, it's one of the things I did learn, perhaps, from looking into the abyss to the degree that I have had to, or was willing to, was that at some level you have to make a fundamental statement of faith. When God creates the world, after each day he says he saw that it was good. You think, well, is it good? It's like, well, there's a tough question. Do you want to bring a child into a world such as this? Which is a fundamental question of whether or not it's good. It's an act of faith to declare that it's good, because the evidence is ambivalent. And so then you think, okay, well, am I going to act as if it's good? And what would happen if I did? And maybe the answer to that is, I think this is the answer. The more you act out the proposition that it's good, the better it gets. And so that's it. Dostoevsky said this is something else. Every man is not only responsible for everything he does, but for everything everyone else does. It's like, what, is that profound, or are you just insane? Then you think, is what you receive back proportionate to what you deliver? And the answer to that might be yes. That's a terrifying idea, man. And it's certainly, you can see that it's true in some sense, because people certainly respond to you in kind with how you treat them. That's certainly the case.
I mean, it's terrifying and it's exciting.
Yeah, right. Well, that's an adventure, isn't it?
You create the world by the way you live it. The world you experience is defined by the way you live that world. And that's really interesting. And then taken as a collective, we create the world together in that way.
Yeah.
What do you think is the meaning of it all? What's the meaning of life, Jordan Peterson? We've defined it many, many times throughout this conversation.
It's the adventure along the route, man. And I would say Where's that adventure to be found? In faith? What's the faith? The highest value is love, and truth is its handmaiden. That's a statement of faith, right? Because you can't tell. You have to act it out to see if it's true. And so you can't even find out without, and that's so peculiar. You have to make the commitment a priori.
Yeah.
It's like a marriage. It's the same thing. It's like, well, is this the person for me? Oh, that's the wrong question. How do I find out if this is the person for me? By binding myself to them. Well, maybe the same thing's true of life, right? You bind yourself to it. And the tighter you bind yourself to it, the more you find out what it is. And that's like a radical embrace. And it's a really radical embrace. That's the crucifix symbol. And more than that, because like I said, the full passion story isn't death. It isn't even unjust death. It isn't even unjust death and the crucifixion of the innocent, which is really getting pretty bad. It's unjust, torturous, innocent death attendant upon betrayal and tyranny, followed by hell. Well, that's a hell of a thing to radically embrace. It's like, bring it on.
I think a lot of people put truth as the highest ideal and think they can get to that ideal while living in a place of cynicism and ultimately escape from life and hiding from life, afraid of life. And it's beautifully put that love is the highest ideal to reach for, and truth is...
It's handmaiden. I thought about that for a long time, right? This hierarchy of ideal. And the thing about truth, that bitter truth, let's say, that cynical truth, is it can break the shackles of naivety. And actually, a burnt cynicism is a moral improvement over a blind naivety. Even though one is in some ways positive, but only because it's protected, and the other is bitter and dark, but still better. But you're not done at that point. You're just barely started. It's like you're cynical. You're not cynical enough.